We have some exciting news for our listeners. This summer, 2025, we will be releasing our book, Confronting Evil in Our Time, unpacking the Screwtape Letters podcast inspired by C.S. Lewis. We are making signed first edition copies available for you leading up to the release. To secure your first edition signed copy, go to screwtapeletterspodcast.com and fill out the form to get your book. From Galen and I, we want to thank you for your support and Jesus Christ, who makes all things possible. God bless.
All right, well, folks, we're back. Screwtape Letters podcast, Confronting Evil in Our Time. We find ourselves today in chapter 18, where we are talking about sex and love. And who doesn't love talking about sex?
Yeah, exactly. Well, marriage as well. It's
marriage as well, for sure. Marriage, covenant, but kind of the broader idea of what real, true biblical love looks like, and then how that should be lived out in our human relationships.
Galen, I've got to say, this is, I think, definitely top 10 letters in the Screwtape Letters.
Yeah, this is a good one. Yeah,
there's some brilliance in this one. And you even noted very early on when we were going through this, before we even thought of doing the Easter egg series, that there was a couple of different Easter eggs in this episode as well. But, why don't you kick us off with what we're seeing as that main Easter egg, which comes pretty early on in the story as well.
Yeah, and first, I just want to point out, before we even dive into this chapter, I believe, and we hinted at this a little bit last week when we talked about gluttony and sex, I believe the demonic has a very specific attack on human sexuality, because one of the most powerful ways to distort the life God has planned for his people and his children is to manipulate what God wanted sex to look like. And sex is like a raging hot fire that needs to be confined in a fireplace. It's a good and powerful thing, but it's very specific. And just any type of twisting or distorting the guidelines and what God created and intended takes that fire and just throws it all over the house, and you can destroy something really quickly. So I think the demonic is very strategic about really messing with sexuality, love, and marriage.
Yeah, so, and I think when it goes off the rails as well to that point, like you look at history like Caligula, where it was open season, and all of a sudden society falls apart as well. So right. It gets to that tipping point.
Right. So a couple real Easter eggs in here. I want to point out one that he says, on the first page, if you have the book or if you're listening, it's early on in the chapter. He talks about the superficial love, and he says, basically we want to get this idea planted that love is just infatuation when you're young and you're dating, and there's sparks and there's the feels and the flutters and all that stuff. And then if that feeling goes away, that marriage really ought to always promise this excitement, this superficial excitement, and a marriage which does not do so is no longer binding. So in other words, hey, if you get married and all of a sudden that fluttery feeling goes away, you're no longer bound in marriage.
Check,
and then
please, right?
Yeah, say it again.
Check, please, is what
exactly
about, right. Let's just walk away. It wasn't worth it in the first place,
But this demonic idea, he actually says, this is our parody of an idea that came from the enemy.
Right.
And what is the parody, and what is the idea that really God had that the demonic is kind of making a parody of when they make that statement?
Well, the great part is when you read biblical truth around marriage, it's about, and the word I love is dependency. And I think in our modern culture, the idea of dependency has become a word that means you're weak rather than means you're strong, because I'm dependent on my wife. My wife's dependent on me. My children are dependent on me, which is what you get with a family. And that dependency within the relationship, love doesn't factor into that. Love's an emotion.
Exactly, because it's based on a decision. It's based on a promise. It's based on a commitment. And that fosters a secure environment where you can be vulnerable and dependent on each other.
Correct.
In a good and healthy way. Yeah.
Yeah, and like we said last week, it's about self-control. It's about dependence, and you combine these things together for a great relationship. And in the same way, within marriage is dependence. Within business, you're dependent on your business partners. And you dependency is not a weak term. It isn't somebody who's weak, who's dependent. It is somebody who is living a true life, knowing that there are certain things and people you need in your world to operate and do life with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, actually, I want to pin that dependency thought, because that's going to come up really big in what I think is the next major point that he makes here in this letter. But again, that parity being the fact that God designed covenant to be something that exists through good feelings and bad feelings.
Yep,
it's a covenant and it's a promise. The idea is I'm going to be faithful no matter what. And the only thing that can really terminate a marriage, Jesus says, is sexual immorality, where demonic is going to take that idea and twist it. And how, if you ever transgress me, according to Jesus, if you ever, the only thing that could dissolve a marriage and qualify for divorce, according to Jesus, is if you compromise and fail to deliver to me that fidelity and that interdependence that you're talking about. Yeah. The demonic idea is, but if you refuse, if at some point I no longer get that feeling of wonderful flutters in my belly, then it's no longer valid. God's idea of marriage is covenant. Satan's idea of marriage is superficial feelings.
You know what just came to mind to me, though, Galen, as well, in the modern era that we live in, how we've got these people who it's all about feelings. Everything they do in culture is feelings driven, right? And there's no foundation to it. There's no grounding. There's no structure. It's just emoting.
Right. It is kind of running rampant. You know, I've got my son just turned 4 years old, and I tell him all the time, he says something he doesn't want to do. And I said, well, good. Doing what you don't want to do builds good character. Do it anyway. And it's like, we're not taught that in the world enough, you know? It's unfortunate.
And they even use it in like, I'm not even going to find the truth. I'm just it's the way I feel.
It's totally just however I'm feeling in the moment, actually replacing objective with subjective in the highest and most unfortunate.
Yeah, and I think even on a political level, you'll even get people who will say, I don't know the facts about it, but I just feel, so I'm going to vote this way. So they don't even delve into subject matter or truth or, you know, facts in and around them. It's all about just feelings. So,
right.
Yeah.
A fun little tangent there, but unfortunately very true and relevant in our day today, you know. But yeah, it's okay. I want to go to the next page. We're going a little bit beyond the Easter eggs, but again, this was just a really, really good episode or a good letter here. He talks about what that idea of real love is, and he says basically, you know, in the demonic realm, he says the whole philosophy of hell. The whole mindset, the whole worldview of hell is that I can only seek my good if I'm seeking your bad. It's like a zero-sum game. The only way I can win is if you can lose. And that idea is not God's idea of love. God, he says here, the good of oneself is to be the good of another. That's somehow the enemy's philosophy of love. And that is the thing that's really goes deep and lays a foundation for not just a feeling of love that's fleeting, of dating infatuation, but a foundation of love that can carry you through a lifetime of relationship and family. And really the way he defines love is basically, I'm going to find my good in life in fulfilling your good in life. And if you have two people, this is where you talk about interdependence. I look at my wife, I'm not happy, healthy, satisfied, fulfilled, unless my wife is happy, satisfied, and fulfilled. And my wife views me the same way. She doesn't view herself as being happy, satisfied, and fulfilled in life unless she can get me to feel happy, satisfied, and fulfilled. So when you're doing life in a biblical marriage with like God's design of love, my identity and joy is predicated on your fulfilling, you finding that, and vice versa. You have two people not competing against each other, but for each other, constantly trying to bring about the best outcomes for each.
You know, you mentioned this about competition within relationships, and I know quite a few marriages that have ended where it's almost felt like that. I won, or I made sure she lost, you know, that sort of thing.
Oh, man.
But it's that competition. It's like you both lose and your children loses too. But
right.
it is that situation where it's if the husband's out having a good time too much, then the wife feels like I need to go out and have too much of a good time to compete with him. And so rather than supporting each other through challenges and highs, lows, but like you said, it becomes this competition rather than this interdependency and oneness within there.
Right.
As it says in Genesis, we become one flesh. We cleave to our partner and become one flesh. So where you've got that going forward, rather than two people with this emotion in between who are battling for first place.
So it's a totally different concept than what the demonic are rolling out.
Right. And that's awesome the way C.S. Lewis throws that in here, that it is that, what do you call it, a counterfeit of, you know, what Christ meant or what
God meant. A parody. Yeah, it's a parody of God's love.
Right. Yeah.
So I want to go on. There's a second kind of specific Easter egg here later on in the chapter. And he's talking a little bit more about sex and family and the role of sex. And he says, now comes the joke. The enemy described a married couple as one flesh. Two people come together and they're one. He did not say happily married couple or a couple who married because they were in love, but you make the humans ignore that. In other words, marriage is predicated on decision and commitment and covenant a lot more than it is the feelings of love. And when you come together and you're married, you're one flesh, you're having sex, you're united, and that builds that idea of love. But he says, you can also make them forget about what the man they call Paul did not confine to just married couples. So this is, Paul makes a reference to something very specific. That he says mere copulation for him makes one flesh. So what he's talking about here is directly from, I got to pull it up. Where did that go? 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 15 through 20. So here's your real Easter egg where the C.S. Lewis is referencing a direct passage of Scripture, 1 Corinthians 6, 15 through 20. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For as it is written, the two become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. So flee from sexual immorality.
Now, also, the part of that Easter egg is that the demonic will not let you be forgiven. The one who they call Paul, but we don't call him that because to us he's never redeemed.
100%. The demonic will never recognize the new you. They'll never recognize what you are in Christ. Paul was Saul. God saved him, redeemed him, transformed his life, made him Paul. Yeah, he's always Saul to the demonic. They're always going to hold you to your past and your sins. God doesn't do that.
Now, there is another passage out of Corinthians, and obviously Paul's letters to the Corinthians, this was a bigger topic. 1 Corinthians 7, 3 through 5, the husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband, a show of mutuality within that love, sexual intimacy, and support for each other.
And why does he say that?
Well, I think it's a lot of it that comes down to, because again, you want to take it out of just the feelings realm.
Right.
Because it becomes a commitment to each other. And, you may not be in the mood, she may be in the mood, but it's great if you both are and at that same peak. But you also want to know that this is within a marriage where you do things for each other that you may not want to do, but and that's nothing wrong with that. That's called, serving someone. It's
sacrifice. Yeah.
sacrifice, correct. Yeah.
Right.
But without it having that heady idea of like, I'm owed something, right? It's not a sacrifice that I'm owed anything for. It's because I love you sacrifice.
It's a sacrifice that the other person gets to give,
correct,
to provide a fulfillment in you. But I think the idea really from Paul is that, or let's take it this way. The idea from Screwtape and the demonic realm is that you should only get married if you have these fleeting loves for each other, and if that goes away, you don't have to be married. Also, sex, don't even worry about that. It's just a physical thing. It's just like having a cup of coffee with somebody.
Even the spiders do it.
Even the spiders, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's so not true that act of sexual intercourse doesn't just entwine your body, it starts to entwine your soul.
Yep.
And God's design is that sex happen between a husband and a wife to build that relationship, to create that mutual dependence. And it's something physical that starts to bond even at the soul level, where you can find that love expressed not just in the physical act of having sex, but now you care about this person and you can live out God's idea of love. I'm going to always want to pursue their good and their well-being, not instead of my own. You're actually pursuing their good and well-being as the pursuit of your own good and well-being. And a healthy sexual relationship builds that. Sex with a prostitute, sex with someone you're not married to, just confuses that. Now you're binding yourself, you're knitting your soul to someone that's not even there. It lowers and cheapens your capacity to truly and properly love one spouse.
What's interesting, Gail, as we were looking this up, Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 7:15 about another reason for divorce, where if one partner becomes unbelieving. So the passage is, but if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. And maybe there's a deeper delve into this, but it seems to be through there that it's talking about, like, obviously, if you're both dependent on each other and have Christ as your other dependence within that marriage, if one of you falls out of that, is now you've got this really weird relationship.
Right. Well, I think for sure, I think he's talking specifically if there's an unbelieving spouse and they leave, they abandon, they walk away, and they pursue divorce. I think he's kind of releasing the believing spouse to say, you can't just cling to somebody that doesn't want to be married to you. If they're abandoning, if they're walking away from the relationship, at that point, there's nothing you can do but to pursue the divorce. But
I also think it talks into, and when we had the battles in Los Angeles here over, keeping marriage between a man and a woman, right? When they wanted gay marriage, and people said, no, take everything but the word. You can take the relationship, you can take like the court papers and everything, but just don't take the word. Is because marriage is a religious union.
Right? Well, that 100% is.
Right.
Yeah.
And therefore, if one partner is unbelieving, that now you have a union that doesn't have that trifecta of God, husband, wife. You don't have that triad there.
Right.
So I can understand it in there. But yeah, this is a brilliant episode. This one is again, probably another one of the, well, it is a top 10 one for sure.
Right. I want to point out one other passage, and it's I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but it's from I reference it a lot, especially when doing weddings and things like that. Paul in Ephesians chapter 5 talks about how husbands are to love their wives, and husbands, you're supposed to love your wives as Christ loved the church. And he says this actually is the mystery of the gospel. And this point is, it's not just that when we talk about marital covenant love between a man and a woman the way God designed, he's not trying to just find an example and say, well, yeah, kind of like the way Christ loved the church. It's actually that God had the idea for marriage before the creation of time, before the dawn of time, and actually created marriage to be a picture of his love for his people. It's not that it's just a good analogy to, well, as Christ loved the church. God had the whole thing planned out from the beginning, knew the love that he was going to have for his people, knew the self-sacrificial love that Christ would have for his own people and how Jesus would die on the cross. And he literally created marriage to help picture that. So all that to say, Jesus on the whole point of marriage is to be a picture of God's love for his people that we see based on what Jesus did at the cross is the example of self-sacrificial covenant forever love that we get to enjoy in this life with a good, God willing, a believing spouse. That's really what we're going for. And every aspect of life, the fun part of falling in love, good marital sex is all part of living out God's design for humanity.
Well said. Yeah.
So another great episode, letter 18. Kind of went off the rails on this one, covered a lot of material, kind of recovered a lot of the chapter, but found some good Easter eggs in there as well on sex and marriage and love. So we will see you all next time at the Screwtape Letters podcast, confronting evil in our time.